Oscar, I didn't clean up your room. I just neatened it a little. Because of the dust. There was such dust there that's bad for your throat.
From improvised opening credits to a star who lost his voice to cancer, from DVD releases that butchered musical scenes to actors who trolled network censors with homoerotic jokes, the beloved sitcom about two divorced roommates hiding far stranger secrets than Felix's obsessive cleaning habits. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about. The Odd Couple Fact 1. Tony Randall wanted Mickey Rooney as Oscar. When it came time to cast the television version of The Odd Couple, the producers had a very specific vision for who should play the two mismatched roommates, but not everyone agreed on the perfect pairing. Tony Randall was the first actor signed to the project, landing the role of the uptight and overly neat Felix Unger. And once he was on board, he had strong opinions about who should play opposite him as the slovenly sports writer Oscar Madison. Randall pushed hard for Mickey Rooney to take the role of Oscar. Rooney was a Hollywood legend who had been one of the highest-paid actors in the 1930s and 40s, and he certainly had the comedic chops for the part. He even had connections to the Odd Couple world, having performed in a Las Vegas stage production of the play. Randall thought Rooney would be perfect, and he made his preference known to the production team. But producer Gary Marshall had someone else entirely in mind. Marshall wanted Jack Klugman, who had actually replaced Walter Matthau as Oscar in the original Broadway production back in 1965. Klugman knew the character inside and out, having played Oscar on stage for a full year. The problem was that the network and studio executives were not immediately sold on the idea. Marshall had to lobby hard to get Klugman hired, fighting against resistance from above. According to Klugman himself, Marshall really went to bat for him during the casting process. When Klugman later asked Marshall why he fought so hard, Marshall explained that he had been impressed watching Klugman perform opposite Ethel Merman in Gypsy on Broadway, where Klugman never flinched even when Merman accidentally spit on him during her big numbers. That kind of professionalism convinced Marshall that Klugman was the right choice. Fact 2. Neil Simon hated his own name on the show. The Odd Couple began as a hugely successful Broadway play written by Neil Simon in 1965, and when the television series launched in 1970, the producers wanted to capitalize on that famous connection. Early episodes of the show actually carried the title Neil Simon's The Odd Couple right there in the opening credits, making it look like the legendary playwright was personally involved in crafting every episode. The problem was that Neil Simon had absolutely nothing to do with the television scripts. He had written the original play and received a standard credit for that, but the weekly episodes were being written by a completely different team of television writers working under producer Gary Marshall. Simon was worried that putting his name so prominently in the title would give viewers the wrong impression, making them think he was personally responsible for the quality of scripts he had never even read. Simon actually objected to this use of his name and wanted it removed from the title. He felt uncomfortable being so closely associated with a show whose quality he could not guarantee, especially since he had no control over what the writers were creating each week. The show eventually dropped Neil Simon's from the title, though Simon continued to receive his proper credit for creating the original characters and story. Here is where the story takes a nice turn. After the show had been running for a couple of seasons, Simon actually sat down and watched it. To his surprise and delight, he genuinely enjoyed what Randall, Klugman, and the writing team had created. He became a real fan of the series, appreciating how they had brought his characters to life in a new medium. Simon liked the show so much that he eventually agreed to make a cameo appearance in an episode during the 5th season, showing up as himself in an uncredited role. Fact 3. The Starz trolled network censors television in the early 1970s operated under much stricter content guidelines than what audiences see today, with network censors carefully reviewing every episode for anything that might be considered inappropriate or offensive. The Odd Couple presented a particular challenge for these censors because the basic premise of two divorced men living together could easily be interpreted in ways that made network executives nervous about viewer perceptions. Tony Randall and Jack Klugman were well aware of this anxiety, and being the experienced performers they were, they decided to have a little fun with it. According to reports about the production, the two stars would intentionally play up homoerotic subtext during certain takes of their scenes together. They knew exactly which moments might make the suits upstairs uncomfortable, and they leaned into those moments with enthusiasm. The real joke was in how the editing process worked. The producers would assemble initial cuts of episodes that included these deliberately suggestive performances, and those cuts would be sent to the network censors for review. Randall and Klugman apparently got a kick out of knowing that their exaggerated takes would cause studio executives to have strong reactions when they watched the footage. The goal was never to actually air anything inappropriate, but simply to rattle the cages of the people responsible for policing the content. This playful rebellion reflected the personalities of both actors, who were serious about their craft but also enjoyed the collaborative mischief that comes with a comfortable working relationship. They had found a way to entertain themselves during the production process, while also poking fun at the sometimes overly cautious television standards of the era. The censors would flag the problematic footage, the normal takes would be used instead, and everyone moved on, though Randall and Klugman got their laughs along the way. Fact 4. Jack Klugman's real wife. Played his ex-wife, one of the recurring characters on The Odd Couple was Blanche Madison, the ex-wife of Oscar, who would show up occasionally to trade barbs with her former husband and remind viewers why their marriage had fallen apart. The role was played by actress Brett Summers, who delivered her lines with perfect comic timing and had undeniable chemistry with Jack Klugman in their scenes together. What many viewers did not realize was that Summers and Klugman were actually married in real life. The casting created an interesting dynamic on screen, with Klugman essentially playing opposite his actual wife in scenes where their characters bickered and fought like the divorced couple they were supposed to be. Summers brought a sharpness to her performance that made the verbal sparring between Oscar and Blanche feel particularly authentic, and some observers compared their back-and-forth exchanges to classic radio comedy duos from earlier decades. Here is where the situation becomes even more unusual. While Klugman and Summers were legally married throughout the entire run of The Odd Couple, they were actually separated during that same period. The couple had been experiencing difficulties in their relationship, and although they never officially divorced while the show was in production, they were not living together as husband and wife. They remained separated for more than 30 years, but stayed legally married until Summers passed away in 2007. So every time audiences watched Oscar and Blanche argue about their failed marriage and take jabs at each other, they were watching two people who were technically still married to each other but living apart in real life. The layers of reality and fiction blended together in a way that added an unspoken depth to their performances, even if most viewers had no idea what was actually happening behind the scenes. Fact 5. The opening credits were completely improvised. The opening credits of The Odd Couple became iconic among fans of the show, featuring Felix and Oscar wandering around New York City and getting into various comedic situations that perfectly illustrated their contrasting personalities. Viewers would see Oscar walking into wet cement while distracted by an attractive woman passing by, or Felix trying unsuccessfully to help an elderly lady cross the street, or both men dancing awkwardly around a maypole in Central Park. These moments felt natural and spontaneous, and there was a good reason for that. According to reports about the production, these opening credit sequences were completely improvised. One of the show's directors took Tony Randall and Jack Klugman out onto the streets of New York City with a camera crew and simply followed them around as they performed in character. There was no detailed script telling them exactly what to do or where to go. Instead, the actors drew on their understanding of Felix and Oscar to create these little vignettes on the spot. The results captured something genuine about both the characters and the city itself. You could see Felix and Oscar interacting with real New Yorkers and real locations, giving the footage a documentary-like quality that contrasted nicely with the studio-bound episodes themselves. The sequence ends with the famous shot of the two men sitting on a park bench near Grand Army Plaza, where Oscar tosses his lunch wrapper on the ground and Felix immediately gestures for him to pick it up, summing up their entire relationship in one simple image. This approach to the opening credits was relatively unusual for sitcoms of that era, which typically featured more polished and carefully staged title sequences. The improvised footage gave The Odd Couple a distinctive look and established the personalities of the main characters before the actual story even began each week. Fact 6. Klugman predicted the syndication goldmine. During its original 5-year run on ABC from 1970 to 1975, The Odd Couple never came close to being a ratings hit. The show struggled in the Nielsen ratings and never cracked the top 30 programs in any season it was on the air. From a purely commercial standpoint, it looked like a modest success at best, the kind of show that would be forgotten once it left the airwaves. Jack Klugman saw things differently. He believed that The Odd Couple had the kind of broad appeal and timeless humor that would make it enormously popular once it entered syndication and started airing on local stations across the country. Syndication was where shows could find new audiences and run for years or even decades after their original network runs ended. And Klugman was convinced that The Odd Couple would thrive in that environment. He was so confident in this prediction that he approached Tony Randall with an unusual proposal. Klugman suggested that instead of taking their full salaries, they should negotiate to receive a percentage of the syndication rights to the show. This was a gamble because it meant accepting less money up front in exchange for potential future earnings that might never materialize if the show flopped in reruns. Randall was skeptical of the idea, but Klugman eventually convinced him to go along with the plan. As it turned out, Klugman's instincts were absolutely correct. Once The Odd Couple entered syndication in the mid to late 1970s, it became a massive hit. At one point, stations like WPIX in New York were showing the series 4 times a day. The show that had never been a ratings winner during its original run became a syndication goldmine, and both Randall and Klugman became very wealthy men as a result. Fact 7. Throat cancer left Klugman voiceless. Jack. Klugman was a heavy smoker for much of his life, often seen with a cigarette or cigar both on screen and off. He once explained that he started smoking because his idol, actor John Garfield, smoked, and Klugman wanted to emulate him in every way. This habit would eventually have devastating consequences for his health and nearly ended his career entirely. Klugman was first diagnosed with throat cancer back in 1974 while The Odd Couple was still on the air. He underwent treatment and was able to continue working without major interruption at that time. However, the cancer returned in 1989, and this time the surgery required to save his life came at a tremendous cost. Doctors had to remove his right vocal cord, leaving Klugman completely unable to speak. For an actor whose voice was such a distinctive part of his performances, losing the ability to speak was absolutely crushing. Klugman was sidelined from his career for several years, unable to do the work he loved. Many people in his position might have given up on acting entirely, accepting that their performing days were over. But Tony Randall refused to let his friend and former co-star fade away. In 1991, Randall invited Klugman to join him for a single benefit performance of The Odd Couple on stage in New York to raise money for the National Actors Theater. Klugman was hesitant, telling Randall that he could barely speak on the telephone, let alone perform in front of an audience. But Randall insisted, promising that they would use microphones and that the audience would hear him. Klugman agreed, and worked with a voice specialist to strengthen his remaining vocal cord. The performance was a triumph, marking his return to acting and demonstrating incredible determination in overcoming what had seemed like an impossible obstacle. Fact 8. The Pigeon sisters played the same role in 3 versions. Among the most memorable supporting characters in the Odd Couple universe are the Pigeon sisters. Cecily and Gwendolyn, a pair of charming and slightly ditzy British women who live in the same building as Felix and Oscar and occasionally serve as their dates. The sisters first appeared in Neil Simon's original Broadway play in 1965 and quickly became fan favorites for their giggly personalities and gentle humor. What makes these characters particularly notable is that the same 2 actresses played them across 3 completely different versions of the story. Monica Evans played Cecily and Carol Shelley played Gwendolyn in the original Broadway production, where they performed for the entire run of the play. When the 1968 film was made with Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, Evans and Shelley were brought back to reprise their roles on the big screen. And when the television series launched in 1970, both actresses returned once again to play the Pigeon sisters. This makes Evans and Shelley the only performers to appear as the same characters in the play, the film, and the television series. It was a remarkable run that demonstrated just how perfectly they had captured these characters from the very beginning. Neil Simon had actually traveled to London specifically to find British actresses for these roles because he could not find anyone in New York who fit what he was looking for. Despite this impressive pedigree, the Pigeon sisters were phased out of the television series after just the first season. Producer Gary Marshall decided that Oscar and Felix needed to date other women so that audiences could see them interacting with different romantic interests. Evans and Shelley moved on to other projects, though they remained close friends and later did voice work together for Disney animated films, including The Aristocats and Robin Hood. Fact 9. DVD releases are butchered and incomplete. When fans of The Odd Couple finally got the chance to own their favorite episodes on DVD, many of them expected to receive the complete, unedited versions of the shows they remembered watching years ago. What they got instead sparked outrage among dedicated viewers who noticed that something was very wrong with the releases. The first season, released by Time Life Video, contained the original episodes as they had actually aired. But when CBS Home Entertainment took over and released seasons 2 through 5, they made a troubling decision. Rather than pay the licensing fees required to use certain copyrighted music that appeared in the episodes, the studio simply edited out scenes that contained those songs. This meant that short segments, jokes, and sometimes entire scenes were removed from episodes that were being sold as complete. Some of the cuts were particularly painful for fans. In one episode, there is a scene where Oscar, Murray, and Myrna sing a 3-part harmony version of a classic song to help Felix fall asleep, only for Murray to yell for them to do it one more time. That entire scene is missing from the DVD. In an episode featuring guest star Pernell Roberts, the epilogue has his character about to sing a song, but on the DVD, the episode simply ends abruptly before he can start. Perhaps the most heartbreaking cut comes in the series finale. In the original broadcast, after Felix and his ex-wife Gloria remarry, Oscar bursts into an enthusiastic rendition of a famous song while dancing with joy. This moment, which many fans remember as one of the most joyous scenes in television sitcom history, is completely wiped from the DVD release. The studio labeled these sets as complete, while knowing they had been intentionally edited, leaving fans feeling misled and disappointed. Fact 10. The show was canceled every single year. Looking back at The Odd Couple today, it seems like one of those classic shows that must have been a smash hit during its original run. After all, it lasted 5 seasons, won multiple Emmy Awards, and went on to become a syndication phenomenon. but the reality of its time on ABC was far more precarious than most people realize. The Odd Couple was never a ratings success during its original broadcast run. In fact, the show never once cracked the top 30 programs in the Nielsen ratings during any of its 5 seasons on the air. By the normal standards of network television, this kind of performance would typically result in swift cancellation. Networks need shows that attract large audiences so they can charge advertisers premium rates, and The Odd Couple simply was not delivering those numbers. According to reports, the show was actually canceled at the end of every single season after its second year. Network executives would look at the disappointing ratings and make the decision to pull the plug, writing off The Odd Couple as a noble experiment that had failed to find its audience. This happened year after year, with the show seemingly headed for television oblivion each spring. What saved the series every time was something unusual. When summer came and the networks filled their schedules with reruns while preparing new fall shows, The Odd Couple suddenly performed much better. The summer rerun ratings were consistently high enough to make ABC executives reconsider their decision to cancel. Each fall, the show would return for another season, only to struggle again in the ratings and face cancellation once more. This pattern repeated itself throughout the show's run, making its 5-season lifespan something of a minor miracle in television history. Fact 11. 2 TV Guide Top 100 Episodes. In 1997, TV Guide magazine published one of those lists that television fans love to debate. They ranked what they considered to be the 100 greatest episodes of all time, drawing from decades of programming across every genre and network. Landing on this list was a mark of distinction that showed an episode had left a lasting impression on viewers and critics alike. The Odd Couple managed to place not 1, but 2 episodes on this prestigious ranking, a testament to the quality of writing and performance that the show delivered during its run. The first episode to make the list was Password, which aired during the 3rd season and featured real-life game show host Alan Ludden, along with his wife Betty White appearing as themselves. The episode landed at number 5 on the list, putting it among the most celebrated half-hours in television history. In the episode, Oscar gets invited to appear on the actual game show Password, and he brings Felix along as his partner. What follows is comedy gold, as Felix's overly complicated approach to giving clues drives Oscar absolutely crazy. Felix tries to get Oscar to guess words using references to ancient Greek playwrights and obscure facts that only he would know, leading Oscar to become increasingly frustrated and eventually need to be physically removed from the set. The second episode to make the TV Guide list was The Fat Farm, which came in at number 58. Having 2 episodes from the same series appear on a list of the greatest 100 episodes ever is a rare achievement that speaks to how well The Odd Couple captured something special. These rankings helped cement the show's reputation as one of the finest sitcoms of its era, even if the original ratings never reflected that level of quality. Fact 12. Tony Randall won his Emmy. After cancellation. Throughout the 5-year run of The Odd Couple, both Tony Randall and Jack Klugman were nominated for Emmy Awards in every single season. This consistent recognition from their peers showed how respected their performances were within the television industry, even as the show struggled to attract large audiences. Klugman won 2 Emmy Awards for his portrayal of Oscar Madison, taking home the statue in 1971 and again in 1973. Randall, meanwhile, kept receiving nominations but kept coming up short when winners were announced. He delivered consistently excellent work as Felix Unger, creating a character that balanced fussiness with genuine heart, but the Emmy always seemed to go to someone else. This became something of a running situation throughout the show's run on ABC. Then came the Emmy ceremony in 1975. Randall was nominated once again for the 5th and final season of the series, and this time he finally won. After years of being recognized as a nominee without getting to give an acceptance speech, Randall took the stage to claim his award for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Comedy Series. But there was a bittersweet element to the victory. By the time Randall won his Emmy, The Odd Couple had already been canceled by ABC. The final episode had aired, and the show was officially over. Randall acknowledged this situation during his acceptance speech with a memorable quip. As he thanked the people who had helped him throughout the series, he added that he wished he had a job, getting laughs from the audience who understood exactly what he meant. It was a moment that captured both the triumph of finally receiving the industry's highest honor and the frustration of having the show come to an end just as that recognition arrived. Fact 13. They used the same set as the movie. When The Odd Couple made the transition from the big screen to television in 1970, the producers made an interesting decision that connected the new series directly to the successful 1968 film. Rather than build a completely new apartment set for Felix and Oscar to inhabit, they simply used the exact same set that had been constructed for the movie starring Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. This meant that viewers who had seen the film would recognize the layout of the apartment when they tuned into the television series. The rooms, the doorways, the furniture arrangement all looked familiar because they were quite literally the same space. It gave the early episodes of the show a visual continuity with the movie that helped ease the transition to new actors playing these beloved characters. The first season was also filmed using what is called the single camera method, which is the same approach used for most theatrical films. This gave those early episodes a more cinematic look and feel compared to typical sitcoms of the era. However, there was a trade-off. Instead of performing in front of a live studio audience, Randall and Klugman had to work with a laugh track that was added in post-production. Both actors, being classically trained stage performers, disliked this arrangement intensely. Starting with the second season, everything changed. The production switched to a 3-camera setup with a live studio audience, which required building an entirely new apartment set with a different layout. The new set was essentially a mirror image of the original, with the kitchen now on the opposite side and other rooms rearranged to accommodate the new filming style. This change is considered to have improved the show tremendously, allowing Randall and Klugman to feed off the energy of a real audience. Fact 14. A casting mix-up almost derailed everything. The story of how Jack Klugman came to be cast as Oscar Madison on the Odd Couple television series involves one of those Hollywood mix-ups that could have easily resulted in a completely different show. Producer Gary Marshall had seen Klugman's work on stage and knew he wanted him for the role of the slovenly sports writer, so he reached out to the casting department at Paramount to track the actor down. Unfortunately, something got lost in translation between Marshall's request and what the casting department actually did. When Marshall asked them to find Jack Klugman, they somehow got the name confused and instead brought in a different actor entirely. The person who showed up was Jack Crushen, a character actor who had been working in Hollywood for decades and would later become known for playing Grandpa Papadopoulos on the 1980s sitcom Webster. Now, Jack Crushen was a perfectly talented actor with an impressive resume of his own. He had actually won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his role in the 1960 film The Apartment. But he was not Jack Klugman, and he was not what Marshall had in mind for Oscar Madison. The confusion had to be sorted out before the production could move forward with the casting process. Once the mix-up was cleared up and the actual Jack Klugman was brought in, Marshall still had to fight to get him hired. As mentioned earlier, Tony Randall wanted Mickey Rooney for the role, and there was network resistance to Klugman as well. But Marshall was determined to get his first choice, and eventually he succeeded in convincing everyone that Klugman was the right man for the job. Television history might have looked very different if that initial casting confusion had not been corrected. Fact 15. Penny Marshall's wedding episode featured her real family. One of the beloved supporting characters on The Odd Couple was Myrna Turner, the secretary who worked for Oscar at his newspaper office. The role was played by Penny Marshall, who would later go on to achieve massive success as an actress on Laverne and Shirley, and then as a director of hit films like Big and A League of Their Own. But before all that, she was a regular presence on The Odd Couple, bringing her distinctive voice and comic timing to the part of Oscar's long-suffering employee. When it came time to write Penny Marshall's final episode as Myrna, the writers and producers decided to send her character off in style with a wedding. Myrna was getting married to a man named Sheldon, spelled without the letter O in his name, because it had been accidentally left off his birth certificate. This kind of odd detail was typical of the show's quirky humor. What made this episode truly unusual was the casting choices for the wedding scenes. The role of Sheldon, the groom, was played by Rob Reiner, who at the time was Penny Marshall's actual husband in real life. So viewers were watching a fictional wedding ceremony between two people who were actually married to each other off-screen. But the family connections did not stop there. Myrna's siblings, Werner and Verna Turner, also appeared in the episode to celebrate their sister's big day. These characters were played by Gary Marshall and Ronnie Marshall, who were Penny Marshall's real brother and sister. Gary, of course, was also the executive producer of the entire series, making this something of a family affair behind the scenes as well. The episode became a unique moment where fiction and reality blurred together in a way that audiences at home probably never fully realized.